Today's episode of the TribCast is supported by the Texas Tribune membership program. Welcome to the TribCast. I'm Eleanor women's health reporter, joined not today by my co-host, editor-in-chief Matthew Watkins. When I wrote this script, he was going to attend, but then we had to reschedule due to reasons we will get into involving the UT Regents scheduling a poorly timed meeting, as if they knew we were meeting today to talk about this all. So Matthew is not here today. It is just me, and that is fine because I am joined by two phenomenal guests. I am joined, I was going to say all the way on the end, but most people join us on YouTube if you want to watch. Jessica Priest, who is the higher education reporter at the Texas Tribune. Jessica, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. And former higher ed reporter turned investigative reporter, Kate McGee-Balasia. Kate, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. We are really excited for today's episode. We are going to talk about higher education and the state of higher ed in Texas, which is the real reason that Matthew would not attend, is we said, if you're going to talk about higher ed, you have to talk about UT as well as A&M. And he said, no.
He could not abide.
He could not abide. So he is not here, but we can make plenty fun of A&M, and I'm sure approximately 50% of our audience will love that. I will also say I'm really excited about this because a little inside baseball. We got some analytics on the TribCast.
Okay.
And the least watched episode on YouTube was our episode where I had two other female reporters on to talk about abortion.
Oh,
and
that's
now
so sad.
With this, I do think we get to run like a little case study of like, was it that people don't love three women talking, or is it they don't love three women talking about abortion?
Or both.
Or both. So we'll see what our
both are
views
depressing,
look like.
yeah.
Both are depressing. We'll see what the views look like on this. If you want to give help cook the books a little bit, watch this episode on YouTube so that we can conclude people hate talking about abortion, which 3 years on my job has proven true. Okay, so to talk about higher ed, Texas has some of the largest and wealthiest university systems in the country. We have more top-tier research universities than any other state by like a decent margin. We have arguably the best sports teams and the most devoted fan bases in the entire country. So things should be really all happy days on the higher ed beat. And yet nothing is ever quite that simple. We've got protests, we've got legislative battles, we've got major turnover at the top of these big institutions, and we're going to get into all of that. So I want to start by talking about what's going on at the legislature with higher ed. Kate, maybe you can sort of take us back to last session when it feels to me at least like a lot of this sort of kicked off last session.
Yeah, in some ways I would even argue it started a couple sessions ago with the critical race theory ban in K through 12 schools. That prompted a lot of concern from university professors, and that was the ban that, talked about how schools can talk about like race and racism in the classroom. A lot of professors were concerned about kind of the encroachment into the classroom, and professors at UT put out a resolution kind of planting their flag in the sand that they have academic freedom to teach kind of what they want as long as it in their subject matters. And Dan Patrick did not like that. And that was kind of the kickoff that prompted him to say, we're going to end tenure in our universities in the state of Texas, which in 2023 was one of his priority bills. And then around that time, the talk about critical race theory as kind of this buzzword shifted to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We saw a concerted effort. And Texas, I think now we hear about DEI bans on the federal level, and the country is like, we forget that Texas was really leading the way a couple years ago, along with Florida, to kind of be the first states to crack down on DEI offices and this whole apparatus in the university systems. And so the state banned diversity, equity, and inclusion offices. They removed funding for all of these type of programs from, at the state level. Eventually, tenure was not eliminated, but it's now kind of codified in our laws rather than leaving it up to universities and how they want to deal with tenure. So it's given the legislature a lot more power in terms of how they might want to come back and adjust that later on. Although I think faculty kind of felt like it was still a win that they kept tenure. You know, Patrick really wanted to eliminate it. They're out.
Basically, to give them the power to
Hire and
fire
fire.
who they wanted.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the tenure is like, you know, that is one of the standard protections for faculty to be able to teach and research what they want without fear of government encroachment telling them what to do and what they should be researching or what their research should say, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all kind of coming back to this core of having academic freedom in the pursuit of like knowledge and truth rather than what a government might want you to say.
Because tenure's not like traditionally been particularly like it's not been like a political thing, except that it allows professors to, when they feel it necessary, to like speak out against the government. But that was not its like
right. The origin was to kind of make sure that government couldn't come and say like your research is wrong, like your research has to say this, or you have to teach this in the classroom. And so it was to kind of protect from government intervention in the classroom. So there is some political kind of backstory there, I think, and we've seen, you know, pressure in periods of history, this kind of conflict and this tension at the university level. But I think this was the declaration from Patrick a few years ago to end tenure was like got national attention from professor groups and, you know, faculty all over the country because that was really the furthest we've really seen anyone ever kind of go in recent memory in terms of going after tenure as a practice.
And would Texas, if that had happened, would Texas have been the only state to eliminate tenure of other states? Okay.
Yeah. Texas would have been kind of ahead, like
an outlier.
Exactly.
And I remember the criticism of that proposal was that it was going to lead a lot of faculty to pursue opportunities in other states.
Yeah. And that was
drain.
the argument with DEI too. And I think that has not really borne out. I mean, you hear anecdotally people leaving or not taking a job, but I think, you know, Patrick has, you know, made some kind of tongue-in-cheek comments about how we haven't seen that happen and people's lives are complicated and you have working at the University of Texas is still a prestigious job.
More top-tier research universities than
exactly.
any other state.
And like, you know, it's not something, there's not like all these universities just handing out jobs left and right. Like getting a 10-year job at a university is like a year-long process. It's not like you can just go start applying
right, you like take what
willy-nilly.
you can get a lot
So
of times.
it's a much more difficult thing, I think, to really like quantify the impact of why someone might go.
Yeah.
But also now we're living like the unfriendly nature that, you know, faculty feel like they were working in here in Texas kind of exists everywhere now. So
right. As goes Texas. Jessica, so talk to us about like how this sort of crusade from legislators has continued this session. What are the big battle lines we're seeing?
So when I started this on this beat and this session, I was really thinking, will they bring up the same arguments that they did last session? Like, will they try to eliminate tenure again? Will they try to expand the DEI ban because there are exemptions for scholarly research and grants? So I was looking, because we've been seeing complaints from lawmakers in the interim that like sporadically they're tweeting that so-and-so university is not complying with the ban. So that was what I was most anticipating, but what has happened is Senator Creighton, the author of the DEI ban in 2023, authored a piece of legislation this session that's really like sweeping and does a lot of different things, but essentially it would limit faculty's influence on curriculum and hiring decisions and transfer a lot of that, what's traditionally been like, traditionally things that they've advised administration on or had some role in, would defer that and transfer that to the Board of Regents, which are appointed by the governor. So more state control of universities is what we're seeing.
So it's sort of the same root idea, right? Which is like universities are hotbeds of leftist woke ideology. The faculty are kind of the, engine of that, and we should remove some of their authority. Is that right?
Yeah, there's it would set up the bill keeps changing, but one of the things that hasn't changed, kind of remained the same, is this idea that the governing board should review curriculum periodically, and that the curriculum should not include any, I wrote it down, should not promote or advocate any race, sex, ethnicity, or religious belief is better or superior to another. In Creighton's original bill, that also included social and political beliefs. And professors have said that this is essentially like an extension of the DEI ban to, the classroom, and that they've already are operating under this like climate chilling effect climate, and they would be afraid to bring up controversial topics in their classroom, and get a complaint lodged against them.
Interesting.
It's how have faculty responded to the idea of like how these lawmakers paint what's going on in the classroom? Because I remember in the original DEI ban, or even like with the tenure debate, a lot of the faculty would say like this, how they're describing what's going on doesn't reflect what's like actually happening in the classroom or how I'm teaching. Do they feel the same way?
Yeah, they feel like, yes, they do. They feel like there's already like a rigorous review of their coursework, and this would just add like unnecessary bureaucracy, and would make it so that their coursework, they can't like adapt as quickly to what their students need.
We have talked about this on a lot of the TribCast episodes, because like it's a pretty persistent theme in Texas politics, but I also think like in our world, which is that like the pendulum swings, right? Like part of this is that universities had become like really attentive. I mean, some would say not even attentive enough, but like relatively attentive to issues of diversity and equity and inclusion, and, creating these offices, making sure that like first generation students felt welcomed, and, are we creating scholarships to get, kids from underprivileged backgrounds into universities? Like some of that is like groups to support people from underrepresented races on campus. Like how much of this is universities are always a hotbed of liberalism because there's, that's what they are, and how much of this is like a counterweight to, some years of what some would say is like progress?
I mean, I think it was interesting to see how, 2020, we saw all of these student protests on campus after George Floyd's murder, demanding more support and resources for diverse students, more conversations about inequity and how race and racism impacts certain groups differently. And then the next year we have a bill with the critical race theory ban that reframes and like limits how we can talk about these things. So even back then felt like this was a clear pendulum shift. And we've just kind of continued to see it swinging in one direction more and more. I think, so yeah, I definitely think that's a huge part of this.
Which brings us a beautiful segue to a more recent set of protests that I want to talk about, because I really do feel like that's animating a lot of what we're seeing this legislative session. Kate, tell us a little bit about, for anyone who missed this, there was a protest last year. And actually, Kate did miss it. She was on maternity leave.
It was very weird to watch from my couch.
Yeah, but as someone who watched this unfold like our audience did, recap for us these protests.
So between, the inciting event on October 7th that kicked off this war in Gaza and the spring of 2024, we saw like an increased escalation on college campuses as conversations about the war kind of started to bubble up. And we saw that at UT especially. There were instances of like vandalism on campus against Jewish students or Jewish student groups. And there were students who were Palestinian who felt like they were not being protected by the university, and there were comments being made on campus. And we saw this like bubbling up, and then in the spring, around the country, these protests started to call for universities to divest from companies that were supporting Israel, and that was the demand at UT. Around late April, the president, former President Jay Hartzell, called in DPS to kind of handle some of these protests, and they escalated, and we started seeing students getting arrested on campus for the protests, which sparked a huge blowback of not just First Amendment violations, but bringing DPS into what was peaceful protesting, according to the students and faculty on campus, felt like it was creating like an unnecessary and unsafe situation on campus. Petitions called for Hartzell to be removed. There was criticism across the board he was panned from students and faculty with his reaction. Meanwhile, the governor was fully in support of what he was doing. Republican lawmakers across the state showed support for him. Again, there was a second protest that was more of an encampment. Students pitched tents and refused to leave. That was seen as trespassing, and there was another wave of arrests. And the kind of tensions that really continued throughout the spring semester. Some lawsuits have been filed by students saying that their free speech rights were violated by the university. Some of those are ongoing. I think one was recently filed by some students. So the kind of ripple effects continue. But that really, the spring was when it reached a kind of tipping point in terms of real action. And UT was one of many schools around the country where this was playing out.
Right, like I think the slight difference between UT and say like Columbia University, where this was also happening, is like UT, I presume, right, was like engaged in a many facets trying to portray like we are not a hotbed of liberal activity. We're just a university where we all just do research and teach some kids. And it's like, oh, this was like the last thing probably someone like Jay Hartzell, wanted to have to like go sell to the governor of the legislature.
Yeah, I mean, I was not fully covering this as much as other reporters were at the time, but I mean, he was pretty adamant right away that they were not going to put up with disruptions on campus. And that was really the line that a lot of schools that ended up arresting students drew, was this is a disruption. We are supportive of peaceful protesting, but we're not going to be supportive of disruptions on campus that interfere with people's ability to learn. That was their position. And Hartzell stood by that throughout, even though, faculty and students felt very differently.
Jessica, this has certainly come up this legislative session. It's clear, certainly the lawmakers who sort of control who represent the majority of the House and the Senate were not thrilled by these protests. Talk a little bit about how this has shown up in legislation.
Well, I think the bill that I was talking about, SB 37, is partly in response to that. There was a misconception by some that, like, the faculty senate at UT Austin took a vote of no confidence, but it was a separate group. I think it was the American Association of University Professors. So that's one thing. One part of that bill that I didn't mention is that, like, it would eliminate these faculty senates, which advise universities on academic matters. It would eliminate them unless the Board of Regents, I guess, blesses them to continue. And it would, they've always been advisory, but it like puts more restrictions on them. If this bill were to pass, they wouldn't be able to issue any sort of public statement or get involved in any political advocacy. Right now, a lot of faculty senates, the way that they work is members are elected by other faculty members, this would like limit the number how many people can be on the faculty senate, and like half of the body would be appointed by the president of the university. So giving the administration a lot more power. Some other bills that have come up would restrict protesting on campuses, and they've made pretty good progress in the legislature so far. Senator Creighton, again, has a bill that would basically walk back a lot of the free speech protections that Texas enshrined into law like 6 years ago, and give the governing board the power to say which areas of campus people can protest. It would also limit like the use of microphones and sounds to certain hours of the day, protesting overnight, erecting encampments, or even during the last 2 weeks of the semester would not be allowed. And also like wearing masks to disguise yourself. So it has a lot of free speech advocates up in arms. They point out that like back in 2018, the legislature passed a bill to instructing college campuses to make all outdoor common areas traditional public forums. And that was in reaction to conservative speakers being canceled at universities and or disrupted.
I was gonna say, talk about the pendulum.
Right.
Yeah. So the senator who authored that bill, Senator Huffman, she voted for Creighton's bill. So it's kind of interesting. And then we've also seen like a lot of concern about a rise in anti-Semitism on campus. And so one bill that has passed both chambers and is being sent to the governor would require K through 12 schools and public universities and colleges to use a definition of anti-Semitism that is by the I'm forgetting the name, but it's a controversial definition. A lot of governmental entities use it, but the reason it's controversial is because some examples that it gives as anti-Semitic would be like equating like political speech. So like criticism of Israel, people are concerned that might be considered anti-Semitic. So
what I find interesting about these protests, like universities have always been like places of major conflict and protest in American history. You think Vietnam War, you think the apartheid in like South Africa in the 90s. Usually like the students who are protesting are kind of all on the same side or on the same page in terms of what they are protesting against. And with this, we have like two competing groups of students saying like, you know, students who are maybe anti-Zionist or pro-Palestine are, you know, have this one position about Israel and what they are doing there. And then you have students on the other side saying like, the language you're using in these protests is making me feel unsafe on campus. Mm-hmm. And so it's a kind of nuanced line that universities have to walk to kind of like figure out how to navigate students fighting with each other, not just like protesting something at that, like to them or to a global conflict.
Right. It's probably you're right. In that of those examples you gave, it's probably most similar to like apartheid, where it's like another country is having a problem, but I mean there probably were not that many like South African students. Right. Like the Vietnam War, like I think there were a lot of clashes between like returning soldiers and like like ROTC students and things like that. But even then, it was like the U.S. government. You know what I mean? Like you were sort of protesting our country's policies versus like, I mean I'm going to say something and you don't just jump to disagree with me. The Middle East thing is really complicated. And like, you know, where the lines fall, I think has not been like, we like to put everything in America on like these two very like left, right things. And like what's happening there sort of transcends like the easy definitions.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And also like, I just lost my train of thought listening to your very insightful comment.
Thank you. I got stunned into silence.
keep going. I will come
Well,
back to
all I
it.
was gonna say is like, I'm curious, you guys, your personal experiences. Like, I often feel like I went to college in like the 1 4-year period that no one was protesting anything.
Yeah.
Like post Occupy Wall Street, I went to college in D.C. We watched a lot of documentaries about Coney. That was a huge thing. We went to the White House because we killed Osama bin Laden.
Yep.
I literally didn't even have like a presidential election in that 4 years. Or no, it's not true. We had the re-election of Barack Obama, which was like not that exciting because
I
it's
had
a
the
re-election.
first election of
You had the
Barack.
first. Did you guys have like big flashpoints?
No, I mean, I went to school in New York, so Occupy Wall Street was happening.
Okay.
But like, it was separate, and like, I had friends who would go down there, but it was like not ingrained in our culture or on campus in the same way. So I would agree. I mean, I think Obama's presidency, his election, was largely panned as like positive on campus, and there was not a ton of like protesting about like Obamacare. You know, what were like the big
like
policies
the protest was like
that were
the
happening?
Tea Party, but that certainly wasn't
Right.
happening on college. Even like conservative college students, that was much more of like a taxpayer age
Right.
demographic.
Right.
Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, I don't remember anything. I went to Sam Houston State in Texas, and all I can remember is like the typical pastor coming on campus and like yelling at us for sinning. And,
Oh yeah. Yeah, we had like there
and
was,
students
the
like
Westboro
engaging,
Baptist Church
yeah,
came and people got signs.
students
and
engaging with them and
Right.
getting into, I don't know, verbal arguments.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of boring. I mean,
Yeah.
we've
But
had, like,
I would say the biggest reaction was like that we saw on campus was Osama bin Laden getting killed. That was-
Yeah.
I remember that. Like that was.
I do remember that, yeah.
Huge moment.
Mhm.
We were like in the library and like left our stuff and ran to the White House. We were like, we didn't do it.
I was working for the student newspaper, so I went around and like asked people, what do
Yeah.
you think about the
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like we've lived in such an era of protests, starting with like Ferguson, which was like the year I graduated,
Yeah.
straight up to like, I mean, it feels like it's been a lot of protests since I left college.
Oh, this is what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So we were talking about like with the global conflict and protesting about a global conflict. And like, yes, there is demand. The students have demand for the universities to divest.
Right, they've like grounded it in.
But the universities largely have been like, no, I mean, we're not going to do that.
Right.
And it was different than, with the protesting after George Floyd, where students kind of like had real tangible demands that universities were really kind of willing to meet and said, okay, we can work with you on building out offices to maybe handle some of these concerns or having more dialogues on campus.
Right.
Like there was an academic way to kind of approach some of these student demands and have, university, you love a dialogue, love a conversation. They love a committee to talk about things. So it was
Together
like
the task force.
they
to
were
put
able to
together
kind of like respond or seem to respond. But it's wild that, 4 years later, much of that is not even has been dismantled a lot in many ways.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do think in some ways the pendulum swings are getting tighter.
Yeah.
Like we talked about this with like THC, for example, and bail reform. A lot of the bail stuff came out of, that same era of like, we're over criminalizing
Right.
certain groups. Like, let's look at this from like a diversity standpoint. And now it's like, absolutely not, the pendulum has swung in the other direction.
And the protest, it's not just in the ledge in terms of like the response we're seeing. The Trump administration, so many of its executive orders and decisions it's made about deportations and federal funding to cuts to universities all comes back to, a response to what we saw last year. So the tail is still much longer than just even what's happening down the street from us.
They're trying to crack down, the Trump administration, on what they see as like universities' failure to protect Jewish students and their like opportunities to learn.
Which I think, as we've talked about, like I think there, are like legitimate concerns there. And also I think that, fits into sort of like this wider agenda that predated, certainly these protests, certainly predated October 7th, about like how can we sort of exert more control over what students are taught. Let's take a quick break, and we want to thank our sponsors, the Texas Tribune membership program. The Texas Tribune Spring Drive ends this week. We're asking for 500 Texans to take action for independent journalism. Will you be one of them? Donate now at texastribune.org/donate and say you heard it on the TribCast, because then I get tagged in our little donations channel, and it makes my day. So I want to talk about, I mean, we've talked about like so much tumult sort of facing these universities. So perhaps it's unsurprising that we're also seeing university leaders flee these jobs. I want to start by talking about like all of these changes at the top of these universities. Let's start with Texas A&M, and longtime system chancellor John Sharp is retiring at the end of June after 14 years leading the largest university system.
No.
The second largest university system. Kate, I want you to talk a little about John Sharp, because he is, you know, more than just a university chancellor or university system chancellor. He's this larger than life political character. You profiled him last year, 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
Kate profiled him over some extended period of time a while ago. Tell us a little bit about like who is John Sharp and what role did he play running this system?
Sure. So Sharp started out, he was an Aggie. He got his undergrad there. He then came to the Capitol and then has basically served in like every possible position that you could in state government. He was the comptroller. He served in the House and the Senate. He was on the Railroad Commission, overseeing oil and gas industry in the state. He tried to run for lieutenant governor. That did not go well. He kind of came up. He was a Democrat, and so he ran twice and lost both times, kind of at the point where Texas stopped electing Democrats. Went into the private sector and then was, pulled back into public service to run his, alma mater, A&M. And over the last 14 years, he has really transformed the A&M system. I mean, he will, if you ask him, tick off all of his accomplishments. He bought a law school that's now like 22nd in the nation. He increased the university system's research portfolio to be like on par and even surpass UT in some measurements. He's brought all of this federal research to this campus he built out in College Station called the Rellis campus that he's very proud of. There's a lot of like Department of Defense kind of work out there that is just like exploding. He helped get A&M a national laboratory at the Los Alamos National Lab that they're running with another university. So he's just like he really planted a flag for the A&M system, I think, to like be taken seriously as a system in the state. I mean, like, I really wish Matthew was here to talk about this.
It'd be more fun.
But like, Aggies have long had a chip on their shoulder about the school down the street, UT.
That's why Matthew wouldn't come on this podcast.
Case in point.
Yeah.
And I was reading a profile that the student newspaper did at A&M about Sharp and his, impending retirement. And a lot of people talked about just like the pride that Sharp has been able to instill in Aggies to be able to like make the system be competitive and show just like the potential for what that school can do. And he, I listed all these things that he did, but like a lot of it is vibes too. Like he has really just infused an energy in the school. It's, the school is like A&M flagship in College Station is like 80,000 students now. It's an insanely large school. He always says he tries to like make sure that every Texas family has an Aggie in the family. So he's just like, I think it is been a success and will be part of his legacy that he helped to elevate the stature of the university to not just be like the, younger sibling of UT Austin.
I just think that's so important, because what A&M grads really needed was like more pride in their institution. Yeah. Like it was like, oh, just even get them to admit they went there was like, oh
so
my God.
Difficult. I know.
I mean, the ring is dragging on the ground while they walk. You, in that fantastic summation of John Sharp's life and career, you left out my single favorite detail about him, which is who was his college roommate at Texas A&M?
Rick Perry.
Rick Perry. which I just love. And they have like all kinds of crazy stories. I recommend reading Kate's profile of him because it involves some real antics between
Yeah.
John Sharp and former Governor Rick Perry. Um, it,
I thought your favorite detail was going to be how he proposed to his second wife
Yes.
on stage at a Robert Earl Keen show on campus a few years ago, which was my favorite detail about him.
Yes, I just think if you're going to be the chancellor of a university, you get to propose on stage at
Absolutely.
a university hosted or university a concert there. Jessica, you have been writing about Sharp's replacement, who's Comptroller Glenn Hagar, also unsurprisingly an A&M alum. Sort of what do we know about him, and more importantly, like the system he stands to inherit? What's the job? What's the task awaiting him?
Well, I think the climate is very different for higher education now. I mean, I think so that's something he's going to have to, a tightrope he's going to have to walk. But what I know about Hagar is like he's obviously a grad of, went to undergrad at Texas A&M. He has a very similar kind of like trajectory to Sharp in that he also served in the Senate and became comptroller, or he is comptroller now. Notably, like during his time in the legislature, he authored a bill that added restrictions to abortions before Roe v. Wade, and that kind of launched the Wendy Davis.
Oh, that was his bill?
Yeah,
I had
Yeah.
no idea.
yeah.
Classic.
So he is conservative. He's a Republican.
For sure.
I'm not really sure how he will land on some of the ideological issues, but in the past, he's used his office to, he's infused some conservative politicking into his office as comptroller. Like he threatened to sanction Harris County for cutting their law enforcement budget. So, and when he ran for reelection in 2022, he said that he was like a conservative family man. Some ideological issues that have come up recently are the Board of Regents passed a ban on drag show performances in their special events venues, and that's drawn Chancellor Sharp and President Mark Welsh into like a First Amendment lawsuit. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles situations like that going forward.
Definitely. Because I think like he's been pretty popular as comptroller. It's like not that hard to be a popular guy in charge of the money when the money is
when the
good.
money's
Right,
good.
And like, I do think he probably, just from like the little, the times I've seen him speak or whatever, I think he's got like the vibes chancellor thing going, but he's definitely inheriting he's to walk a different tightrope than John Sharp.
Yeah, and I think we saw that with Sharp in the last few years, that like the kind of chasm was widening. Like he's always been good at, he's like a consensus guy, and he's always been good at building consensus and getting what he needs to get done, and slapping you on the back and cracking a joke and making he's a deal maker. I think consensus is like a harder game these days in the Capitol. I think we saw some of the controversies that we reported on here at A&M about the Kathleen McElroy situation and the politics that went on behind the scenes with the watering down of her job. And then the professor who was put under investigation for some comments she made about Dan Patrick, and how Sharp kind of tried to use that, like use his kind of consensus building, trying to please everyone way to handle that, and it backfired. Kind of showing that like he was starting to struggle
There's
with
some like limitations to the vibes chancellor.
right.
Yeah.
And I think he was always kind of going to retire. I think it made it easier to make that decision with all of it becoming a difficult job, a more difficult job at the Capitol. But he's also
Right. These are not like lifetime appointments
Right.
for a reason.
And I think like part of Hager's appeal to the board when they chose him was like he knows the Capitol, and that's hugely important. I mean, there were some like really strong academics in that mix of candidates for the job, but being an Aggie was number one, and then like being able to navigate the halls of the Capitol was a crucial number two. Like we talk all about the kind of social controversies and debates that happen within higher ed and the bills that go on, but so much of what the universities do at the Capitol has to do with money and getting money for your universities and getting enough for your pet projects and being able to keep the lights on. And that's, most of the conversations that are happening with these universities. So having someone who understands how the money works is in some ways the most important thing.
Right. I want to give equal time, equal shrift to the University of Texas. But, we've got two major changes happening there. We can sort of talk about, I think, in conjunction with each other. Number one, we've got the departure of their system chancellor, J.B. Milliken, who's going to who's going to Texas, California, and run the University of California system. And then UT Austin president, Jay Hartzell, who is going to Austin, Dallas, and run SMU. Jessica, sort of, what do these two shifts mean for the UT system? Are we surprised that they're kind of happening in the same neighborhood to each other?
Are we surprised that they're happening at the same time?
Yeah.
Texas A&M?
Oh, any of it, yeah.
Well,
do you sort of make of this?
Kate said, the A&M was planned, I think.
These were both pretty sudden.
These were both pretty sudden. I remember I was the first day on higher ed, I had taken a week off in between because I got really sick over the Christmas break playing with little kids. Gave me all their germs. And I remember we were going to have our meeting to talk about covering the legislature. And I was like, good, I need to be there because my plans were disrupted. But yeah, it was sudden. I think the higher ed experts that I've talked to elsewhere in the country have just said it's indicative of how political this job has become and thorny, and they were not surprised that Hartzell would choose to go to a private university, which it also became an R1 institution this year. So it's not some no-name place. So yeah, I think that's what it indicates, that there's the interference from lawmakers is making the job more difficult.
Kate, take us home. I mean, kind of what can we make of all of this, we're going to leave this legislative session with at least some changes, TBD on exactly what they will be, to sort of how the universities function and the power the state has over them. We are at this heightened moment after the protests of attention on what college students do, how free speech works, and we're going to have basically all new leadership at all the major universities. What does the next chapter of higher ed look like?
Yes, please tell me.
Crap. I don't know. I mean, I think part of it will depend on who becomes the permanent. I'm just thinking about UT right now, but whoever just becomes the permanent leaders in the system and the University of Texas at Austin, how they decide to take the message that they've gotten from the legislature and from the Trump administration, and are they going to go along with it, or are they going to push back? I mean, is there a breaking point for universities in terms of how far they're willing to go to work with some of the challenges that have been brought up by the Trump administration in terms of cutting funding or restricting curriculum on campus and things like that? How far are they willing to go? Mm-hmm. We saw a little bit of pushback from Harvard in their situation.
A very different situation.
But where is the line going to be drawn for some of these universities? Or is this a new, more, UT especially gets the reputation of being the liberal bastion in a very conservative state. And I think A&M kind of benefits from the conservative reputation it has in that way, that a lot of that falls on UT. But are we seeing a rewriting of UT and the kind of school that it's going to be in the future in terms of who the new leaders might be, in terms of how they decide to implement these laws, and how satisfied is the legislature going to be? Are they going to feel we've done we've done what we needed to do. We have leaders in place who are going to implement and make sure that like students are being taught what they need to, and that the Marxist professors stay in line. Or are we coming back in 2027 with a whole new batch of ideas of how we can further restrict what's going on? So I think TBD, which I know is
Yeah.
not what you asked, but
Well, we will have to leave it there for now, but I do think, we'll be covering all of this. You both will be, and Jessica especially. So if you guys want to follow along, even on what these bills do this session, texastribune.org. You can find all episodes of the TribCast on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast on all of your platforms. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can reach us at tribcast@texastribune.org. We want to thank today's sponsors, the Texas Tribune Membership Program. You can donate now at texastribune.org/donate. Our producers are Rob Avila and Chris Svoboda. Our theme music is composed by Rob. Thank you to both of our guests for being here, and we
Thank you.
will see you next week.